Good morning. The title of the sermon, Just a Good Story or Something Much, Much More? I begin with the scripture from the 25th chapter of Matthew, verses 31 to 46. Jesus said, "When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will put the sheep at his right hand and the goats at his left. Then the king will say to those at his right hand, 'Come, you that are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me.' Then the righteous will answer him, 'Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you?' And the king will answer them, 'Truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me.' Then he will say to those on his left hand, 'You that are accursed, depart from me into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not welcome me. Naked, and you did not give me clothing. Sick and in prison, and you did not visit me.' Then they will also answer, 'Lord, when was it we saw you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison? It did not take care of you.' Then he will truly answer them, 'Truly I tell you, just as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me.' And these will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life." So ends the reading of the word. I love Matthew 25, this story, this parable of Jesus. For many Christians, Matthew 25, as much as any single story or parable of Jesus, guides and empowers their understanding of faithfulness and how to live our lives as followers of Jesus. Some simply refer to it as Matthew 25. Some refer to it as you did it to the least of these, you did it to me. But whatever you call it, it is an amazing, amazing story of Jesus. 150 years ago, a writer in Russia who would go on to become one of the great writers of the world was also incredibly empowered by Matthew 25. It informed him. It made sense to him. It captured his understanding of Jesus and how he was to follow, how he was to order his life. So Leo Tolstoy of War and Peace fame took Matthew 25 and incorporated into a story which he called "Where Love Is, There God Is Also," or Martin the Cobbler. I share it with you pretty much as Tolstoy wrote it, except in English rather than Russian. In a certain town there lived a cobbler named Martin. He had a tiny room in a basement, the one window of which looked out onto the street. Though he could only see the feet of those who passed by, that worked out okay because as a cobbler, Martin recognized people by their shoes. There was hardly a pair of shoes in the neighborhood that had not been once or twice through his hands. So he often saw his own handiwork through the window. Some he had resoled, some patched, and some he stitched up. He had plenty to do, for he worked hard and did quality work. He used good materials, did not charge too much, and could be relied on. He told the truth and gave no false promises. So he was well known and never short of work. Martin had always been a good man, but in his old age he began to think more about his soul and to draw nearer to God. Martin had experienced a great deal of tragedy and pain in his life. His wife had died, leaving him with a 3-year-old son. None of his older children had lived beyond infancy. Yet when the boy was 8, he fell ill, and after being laid up for a week with a burning fever, the boy died. Martin buried his son and gave way to despair so great and overwhelming that he murmured against God. In his sorrow, he prayed again and again that he too might die. After that, Martin stopped going to church. One day, an old man from Martin's native village, who had been on a pilgrimage for the last 8 years, paid a visit to Martin. Martin opened and poured out his heart to him and told him of his sorrows. "I no longer wish to live. All I ask of God is that I may soon die. I am quite without hope in this world. What else should I live for?" asked Martin. The pilgrim replied, "If you don't have a copy of the New Testament, buy one and read the Gospels. And there you will see how God would have you live. It is all to be found there." These words sank deep into Martin's heart, and that same day he went and bought himself a New Testament in large print and began to read. At first, he intended only to read on holy days, but having once begun, he found it made his heart lighter as he read, and so he read every day. Sometimes he was so absorbed in his reading that the oil in his lamp burnt out before he could tear himself away from the book. He continued to read every night, and the more he read, the more clearly he understood what God required of him and how he might live for God, and his heavy heart grew lighter. His life became peaceful, even joyful. He sat down to his work in the morning, and when he had finished his day's work, he took the lamp down from the wall, stood it on the table, fetched his New Testament from the shelf, opened it, and sat down to read. The more he read, the better he understood, and the clearer and happier he felt in his mind. It happened once that Martin sat up late, absorbed in his New Testament, and he became sleepy. He laid his head down both on his arms. Before he was aware of it, he fell asleep. "Martin," he suddenly heard a voice, as if someone had breathed the words above his ear. He was startled from his sleep. Who's there?" he asked. He turned around and looked at the door. No one was there. He called again, "Who's there?" Then he heard quite distinctively, "Martin, Martin, look out onto the street tomorrow, for I shall come to see you." Martin roused himself, rose from his chair, and rubbed his eyes. He did not know whether he had heard these words in a dream or awake. He put out the lamp and lay down to sleep. The next morning he rose before daylight, and after saying his prayers, he lit the fire and prepared some cabbage soup. Then he sat down by the window and went to work. As he sat working, Martin thought over and over again what had happened the night before. At times it seemed like a dream, and at times he thought he had really heard an audible voice. So he sat by the window, looking out onto the street more than he worked. And whenever anyone passed in unfamiliar shoes, he would stoop and look up so as to see not only the feet, but the face of the passerby as well, just in case it was Jesus coming to visit him, as he had dreamed or maybe even heard. Then an old soldier, Nicholas, with a shovel in his hand, trying to earn a few copper coins, shoveling snow, came by. Martin knew him by his old boots. Nicholas began to clear away the snow in front of Martin's window. Martin glanced at him and thought, "I must be growing crazy with age," said Martin, laughing at his fancy at thinking that Christ would come and visit an old man like me. Yet after he made a dozen stitches, he felt drawn to look out the window again. He saw that Nicholas now leaned his shovel against the wall and was either resting himself or trying to get warm. The old man was broken down and evidently had not enough strength even to clear away a small bit of snow. Martin stuck his awl in its place. He tapped the window with his fingers. Nicholas turned and came to the window. Martin beckoned to him to come in and went and opened the door. "Come in," he said, "and warm yourself a bit. I'm sure you must be cold. May God bless you." Nicholas said, "My bones do ache for sure." He came in, first shaking off the snow, and lest he leave marks on the floor, he began wiping his feet. But as he did so, he tottered and nearly fell. "Don't trouble to wipe your feet," said Martin. "I'll wipe up the floor. It's fine. Come, friend, sit down. Have some tea." Martin filled 2 cups and passed one to his visitor. Nicholas quickly emptied his cup. He began to express his thanks, but it was plain that he would be glad to have some more hot tea. "Have another cup," said Martin, refilling the visitor's cup as well as his own. But while he drank his tea, Martin kept looking out the window onto the street. "Are you expecting anyone?" asked Nicholas. "Am I expecting anyone?" Martin said with a chuckle. "Well, that's an interesting question. I heard something last night that I can't get out of my mind. Whether it was the Lord speaking to me in a vision or a dream and even an audible voice, I don't know. But it whispered, 'Expect me, I will come tomorrow.' I just don't know." It actually happened twice. And to tell you the truth, it sank into my mind so deeply that I am wondering if the Lord might actually be coming to visit me. So that's why I keep looking out the window. Martin then poured Nicholas another cup of hot tea, but Nicholas forgot the tea. He was an old man, easily moved to tears, and as he sat and listened to Martin, tears ran down his cheeks. "Thank you, Martin," said a weeping Nicholas. "You have given me food and comfort both for soul and body. You're very welcome. Come again another time. I am glad to have you as a guest," said Martin. Nicholas went away, and Martin poured out the last of the tea and drank it, then sat down to his work stitching the back seam of a boot. And as he stitched, he kept looking out the window, waiting for the Christ and thinking about him. His head was full of Jesus' words from the Gospels. Then he saw simple, peasant-made shoes of a woman. She passed the window, but stopped by the wall. Martin glanced up at her through the window and did not recognize her. She was a stranger, poorly dressed, and with a baby in her arms. She stopped by the wall with her back to the wind, trying to wrap the baby up, though she had hardly anything to wrap it in. The woman had only summer clothes on, and even they were shabby and worn. Through the window, Martin heard the baby crying and the woman trying to soothe it, but unable to do so. Martin rose and going out the door and up the steps, he called to her. "Why do you stand out there with the baby in the cold? Come inside. You can wrap him up better in a warm place. Come this way." The woman was surprised to see an old man in an apron with spectacles on his nose calling to her, but she followed him in. Martin said, "My dear, sit near the stove. Warm yourself and feed the baby." Martin filled a bowl with hot cabbage soup and got some bread. He spread a cloth on the table and served the soup and bread. "Sit down and eat. I'll mind the baby. I've had children of my own." The woman crossed herself and sitting down at the table began to eat while Martin put the baby on the bed and sat down by it. The baby continued to cry, but Martin put his finger near the baby and then pulled it back. He repeated that same motion again and again. He did not let the baby take his finger in its mouth because his finger was dirty with cobbler's wax. But the baby first grew quiet watching his finger and then began to laugh. And Martin felt very pleased. The woman sat eating and talking and told him who she was and where she had been. "I'm a soldier's wife," she said. "They sent my husband somewhere far away 8 months ago, and I have heard nothing of him since. I had a job and place to live as a cook till my baby was born, but then they would not keep me with a child. For 3 months now I've been struggling, unable to find a place, and I've had to sell all I had for food. I tried to go as a wet nurse, but no one would have me. They said I was too starved looking and thin. Now I have just been to see a tradesman's wife. A woman from our village is in service with her, and she has promised to take me in. I thought it was all settled at last, but she tells me not to come until next week. It is far to her place, and I am worn out, and the baby is cold and hungry. Fortunately, our landlady has pity on us and lets us lodge free, else I don't know where I would go." Martin sighed. "Haven't you any warmer clothing?" he asked. "How could I get warm clothing?" she said. "Why, I pawned my last shawl for 6 pence yesterday." Martin got up. He pulled out from under the bed a small trunk. It was full of clothing from his deceased wife. He found a warm cloak and brought it to the young woman. "Here," he said, "though it is a worn-out old thing, it will do to wrap him up in." The woman looked at the cloak, then at the old man, and taking it, burst into tears. Martin then found some other clothing and gave them to her. And the woman said, "The Lord bless you, friend. Surely Christ must have sent me to your window, else the child would have frozen. It was mild when I started, but now see how cold it is turned. Surely it must have been Christ who made you look out your window and take pity on me." Martin smiled and said, "It is quite true. It was the Lord who made me do it. It was no mere chance that I looked out the window and saw you." Then Martin told the woman his dream or vision, or possibly even the Lord's voice promising to visit him that day. "Who knows? All things are possible," said the woman. And she got up and threw the cloak over her shoulders, wrapping it round herself and round the baby. Then she bowed and thanked Martin once more. "Take this for Christ's sake," said Martin, and gave her 6 pence to get her shawl out of pawn. The woman crossed herself, and Martin did the same, and then he saw her out. After the woman had gone, Martin ate some cabbage soup, cleared the things away, and sat down to work again. He sat and worked, but did not forget the window, and every time a shadow fell on it, he looked up to see who was passing. People he knew or strangers passed, but not the Lord. After a while, Martin saw an old woman pushing an apple cart. She had a large basket, but did not seem to have many apples left in it. She had evidently sold most of her stock. On her back, she had a sack of kindling wood for her stove. The sack evidently hurt her, and she wanted to shift it from one shoulder to the other, so she put it down on the footpath. While she was doing this, a boy in a tattered cap ran up, snatched an apple out of the basket, and tried to slip away. But the old woman noticed it, and turning, caught the boy by the sleeve. He began to struggle, trying to free himself, but the old woman held on with both hands, knocking his cap off his head and seizing hold of his hair. The boy screamed, but the old woman was not going to let go. Martin dropped his awl, rushed out of the door, stumbling up the steps, dropped his spectacles in a hurry, and ran out onto the street. The old woman was pulling the boy's hair and threatening to take him to the police. The lad was struggling and protesting, saying, "Let me go. What are you beating me for? Let me go." Martin separated them. He took the boy by the hand and said, "Let him go, Granny. Forgive him for Christ's sake." The old woman let go, and the boy wished to run away, but Martin stopped him. "Ask the granny's forgiveness," said Martin, "and don't do it again. I saw you take that apple." The boy began to cry and beg for forgiveness. Then Martin took an apple from the basket and gave it to the boy, saying, "I will pay you for this." "God bids us to forgive," said Martin, "or else we shall not be forgiven. Forgive everyone, and a poor child most of all." The old woman said in a softer tone, "I'm a grandmother. It was only his childishness. God help him." As the old woman was about to hoist her sack of kindling on her back, the lad sprang forward to her, saying, "Let me carry it for you, Granny. I'm going that way." The old woman nodded her head and put the sack on the boy's back, and they went down the street together, talking to each other as they walked. When they were out of sight, Martin went back to the house. Having found his spectacles unbroken on the steps, he picked up his awl and set again to work. He worked a little while, but it was getting dark, and he was having trouble seeing his work. So Martin lit his lamp and hung it up and sat down to finish. He finished off one boot and, turning it about, examined it. It was all right. Then he gathered his tools, swept up the cuttings, put away the bristles and the thread and the awls, and taking down the lamp, placed it on the table. Then he took the Gospels from the shelf. A wave of sadness engulfed him. He had so hoped that Christ was truly going to come and visit him. The vision or dream or voice had seemed so real. Yet it was just the imagination of a crazy old man. That was all it was, Martin thought. Then he opened his New Testament to his beloved Gospels. As Martin opened it, the previous night's dream came back to his mind, and no sooner had he thought of it than he seemed to hear footsteps, as though someone were moving behind him. Martin turned around, and it seemed to him as if people were standing in the dark corner of the room, but he could not make out who they were. And a voice whispered in his ear, "Martin, Martin, don't you know me?" Who is it?" muttered Martin. "It is I," said the voice. And out of the dark corner stepped old Nicholas, who smiled, and vanishing like a cloud was seen no more. "It is I," said the voice again. And out of the darkness stepped the young woman with the baby in her arms. And the woman smiled, and the baby laughed, and they too vanished. "It is I," said the voice once more. And the old woman and the boy with the apple stepped out, and both smiled, and then they too vanished. And Martin's soul grew glad. He crossed himself, put on his spectacles, and began to read the gospel just where it had opened, to the 25th chapter of the Gospel of Matthew. And at the top of the page he read, "I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was a stranger, and you took me in." And then at the bottom of the page he read, "Inasmuch as you did it to the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you did it to me." And Martin understood that his dream had come true, and that the Savior had truly come to him that day, and he had welcomed him. I can remember hearing that story for the first time in a sermon vividly. In my home church in Alameda, Court Street United Methodist, I was in high school, probably 15 or 16. A number of things happened that day. First, I was really enthralled by the sermon. I won't say that it was the first sermon that I really got into, but it was without a doubt the sermon that most deeply drew me in. Second, it deeply connected me with the scriptures. Matthew 25 on that day became an indelible story of Jesus. It stood out in my mind. Never would I have to strain my memory to recall it. It was vivid and etched in my consciousness. Third, I realized the power of stories. The story by Tolstoy was a retelling of a Jesus story, a story based on a story. Jesus was a storyteller, and I really liked that. And now the most memorable sermon I ever heard was not only based on a story of Jesus, it included another story to bring the Jesus story to life. Fourth, it was revelatory, a revelation, an epiphany, an aha moment. After that moment, I can never deny that I didn't know what following Jesus looked like. Not that all my questions were answered, by no means, but one key question, what does following Jesus look like, was clearly answered. This last week, we finished up an 8-week Bible study called Your Favorite Movies Bible Study. Through that 8-week Bible study, we had 16 participants, 9 adults and 7 children. Of the 8 movies, 5 were selected by children and 3 selected by adults. The final 2 movies were classic stories, Cinderella and Beauty and the Beast. Both were selected by 2 of our youngest participants, Kennedy Pierce and Olivia Bingen, both 5 years old. They'll correct me if I'm wrong. And those 2 classic stories, very much like Tolstoy's Martin the Cobbler, brought many pieces of the Jesus story to life. Love, forgiveness, kindness, courage, and the dangers of pride and arrogance. And everybody, from the youngest to the oldest, everybody in the class was able to participate fully. Such is the power of stories. In a little over a week, we'll be sending out our annual stewardship letter. Stewardship letters are often seen as simply financial appeals. And while that is certainly a part of the letter, we will also be sharing a new story, a new vision, one that came to Leanna Schultz and Karen Frucci some time ago that they have been pondering, which they recently shared with me. It is a picture of a community of faith, a community of people in which Matthew 25 is taken to heart and is brought to life through our lives. When we think about stewardship, which is what we do with our lives, not only in terms of what we do with our money, but also and especially what we do for others. Each will be invited, each of us, to think about ways that we can bring the story of Jesus to life through the story of our life and the story of this community of faith. Through responding to the actual needs of others, to feed, to clothe, to comfort, to assist, to pray, to visit, using nothing more and nothing less than what God has given to us. I would ask you to read the letter carefully, heartfully, and prayerfully. We are excited about this new story, which is really based on a long-established narrative at the core of this church, and which is based on the Jesus story. And if, as Tolstoy and millions of other Christians throughout the ages have experienced, of this Jesus showing up in us as we respond to the needs of our sisters and our brothers in our midst. This is the good news of the gospel this day. Amen.